It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
We'll be coming forward with our proposals imminently to ensure there is trust and fairness in the social security system.
The Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall will be back in the Commons shortly to announce major cuts to the growing welfare bill. We'll bring you that live. But what about this?
Wouldn't the moral thing to do, the courageous thing to do, be to make a real tough choice and introduce a wealth tax on the very wealthiest people in our society?
We'll ask a leading economist if a wealth tax would work. And the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has a major new policy.
We have to tell the truth. The plans for net zero by 2050 are impossible.
Is she right that our current climate change policies will have catastrophic costs? Joining me, Labour MP David Pinto-Dushinsky, Conservative peer Lord Craig McKinley, Green Party peer Natalie Bennett and political editor of Unheard, Tom McTague. This is Politics Live. Hello. Well, it's a big parliamentary day here in Westminster because after weeks of briefing and speculation and the government saying that it has a moral mission to get more people off welfare and into work, we will see Liz Kendall, the Work and Pensions Secretary, come to the House of Commons and deliver a statement with plans to save or cut £5 billion a year from the growing welfare bill. The government has said it has a duty to do something about the huge numbers of people they say could be looking for work and perhaps just need more support. Now, we're expecting two things broadly. Part of her statement will be about plans to incentivise more universal credit claimants back to work. The other side will be about restricting eligibility for personal independent payments, or PIP. It's not related to work. These are payments or extra money given to people with a serious disability, physical or mental, to help them with everyday tasks. Now, critics, many of them Labour MPs, have said that making £5 billion worth of cuts to the welfare bill shouldn't be done from some of the poorest and most vulnerable in society. Now, we're expecting Liz Kendall to take to her feet in about 15 minutes' time, and we'll bring you that statement live. That's what the government is doing. Meanwhile, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, has given a major speech on net zero this morning. Let's take a look at this from her.
Net zero by 2050 is impossible. I don't say that with pleasure. I want a better future and a better environment for our children, but we have to get real. Anyone who has done any serious analysis knows it cannot be achieved without a significant drop in our living standards, or worse, by bankrupting us. Responsible leaders don't indulge in fictions which are going to make families poorer or mortgage their children's future. Without the rest of the world doing the same, we are making our country less safe, less secure and less resilient.
Natalie Bennett, is Kemi Badenoch right? Net zero is impossible by 2050.
Absolutely not. And more than that, she's economically, socially and environmentally illiterate in that the idea that these actually are costs. These are things that we need to do to make our society healthier and to cut people's bills. I was with the Industry and Parliament Trust this morning talking about new homes and how we should build new homes, and building and retrofitting homes to be warm, comfortable, affordable to heat, cutting people's bills. You look at the carbon brief, for example, people's bills are £40 to £60 higher because we haven't taken the measures we need to. And health, we'll be talking later about how we're a deeply unhealthy society. Looking after nature also means looking after our own health.
Well, Craig, Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Conservative Party, is economically, socially illiterate.
No, she's actually telling the truth, and I think it's very refreshing that we're actually telling the truth to people, that net zero is not working. The rest of the world's given up with net zero. Why is it that in the US that's gone drill, baby, drill under Biden and continuing under Trump, their electricity prices and energy prices generally are a quarter what they are here. There's two countries that have gone completely mad for net zero and renewables and wind and solar. That's Denmark and the UK, and we have the highest domestic electricity bills. And we are losing just about all of the industrial heartlands of Britain are being dismantled, shipped to China. They're building the stuff or making the stuff on the back of cheap coal, putting it on a diesel ship back to the UK, and then we say how virtuous we are. It's a nonsense, it's a sham, and it's time that we moved on.
Natalie?
The cheapest electricity that we can possibly have is solar and wind.
That's
and
rubbish.
what we
That's
should be
rubbish.
doing is having community-owned, focus on
No, I'm
community-owned.
sorry, that is rubbish.
Community.
Yeah, go on, finish your point, yes.
No, we hear this all the time. And
Well,
it's
hang
not true.
on, Craig.
You know
Let Natalie finish her point.
Community-owned energy. So what we could see is communities putting solar panels on the roof of the school, putting solar panels on the sports centre. We want to see communities having their own wind farm that they choose for themselves where to put it, and they get cheap electricity result. That's the kind of model of a different kind of society that actually meets people's needs. Why do we have such high energy bills? We have them because of fossil fuels. Everyone saw the bills went up after Russia invaded Ukraine, and that's because of the price of fossil fuels.
Are you not the least bit concerned that these solar panels are Chinese produced on the back of Uyghur Muslims in conditions of slave labour? Are you not concerned that the supply chain for many of the batteries and the components of batteries, the rare earth metals, are mined on the backs of cobalt dug out of the Democratic Republic of Congo by children? Are you not concerned about these things? Or would you rather not have a domestic solution?
As you know, you've heard me speaking about these issues in the House many times. But what we need to think about is the cleanest, greenest energy you can possibly have is the energy you don't need to use. That's why we need insulated, warm, comfortable homes.
I agree with that, completely and absolutely. And I've insulated my home the same as you have yours, probably. I agree with that.
Should you be telling the truth, to use Craig's words, about the dilemma that is facing the country?
Look, the truth here is, I mean, firstly, it's really striking to see Kemi Badenoch making a speech like this today. I'm actually old enough to remember when she was in favour of net zero, when she spoke in the Commons in 2020
yes,
and
which is
2022. What we know from what she's saying is that it will put up bills, it will repel billions of pounds of investment, but most importantly, it's not a plan for Britain. The reason she's announcing this is not about a long-term plan for this country. It's a short-term plan to get her through the leadership speculation this week.
But what about the substance of what she's saying?
The substance is,
in terms of the costs, she says it will bankrupt us.
So the OBR is really clear on this.
The Office for Budget
that the costs of not dealing with this are between 3 and 5% of GDP per year. The Bank of England says it's up to 8. And what we've got is a Conservative Party that has not learned any of the lessons of its electoral defeat. It is doubling down on the same kind of Liz Truss economics that got this country into a mess in the first place on the one hand. We've got a Green Party who, and Natalie, I hear what you're saying, but I take it a bit more seriously if all of your colleagues didn't spend all of their time opposing renewable energy projects in Hastings, in East Sussex, in Suffolk, in Rutland. The list just goes on and on. Only the Labour government is actually taking action, both to drive growth and to get us to a sustainable climate situation.
All right, well, before I get you two to respond to those points, Tom, I mean, if I put a choice to you, let's take what Kemi Badenoch has said, that it will bankrupt the country. But I suppose, would you choose bankruptcy or would you choose the irrevocable damage that will be done to the world, according to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, if we don't do anything?
Well, neither are politically acceptable, are they? You can't have a politics dependent on either of those two outcomes. I mean, I thought one of the strongest bits of Kemi Badenoch's speech today was when she talked about how the decision to get to net zero by 2050 was kind of agreed without a vote in the House of Commons, without much of a debate. And on that point alone, she is absolutely correct. And what we're seeing now is a divide, political divide over this issue. We're seeing it across Europe, in the United States, across the developed world. It's going to be a defining part of our politics, and it wasn't the right way to go about it back when it was decided.
Do you accept that, Natalie, that actually there hasn't been a big enough conversation about the sort of costs or sacrifices that might need to be made up front in order to get to a stage where we can rely, perhaps more of the time, on renewables?
Well, I don't think what we've seen is enough conversation about how we actually need to make our society work for people. And that's ensuring that we have public transport, that we have strong support for active transport, walking and cycling. We need a society that works for people. And the measures that we need to take for climate are also the measures that we need to take to improve the health of our society, the well-being of our society, to save people's costs, to make sure there's a bus so people can get the bus to go to work that may just simply not run now so people can't take the job in the first place.
Right.
Our society's not working. We don't talk enough about that. And if we talk about those things, and, you know, I'm really surprised, Craig, that you should suggest that Trump's America should be any sort of model for anything at all.
What about consistency, though, when David makes the point that Green MPs, and we've had a few of them on the programme, and they're objecting to pylons, for example, in their constituency, the height of hypocrisy?
Absolutely not, because we have to look after nature and climate. Climate is not the only issue here. We are, as the event I was at this morning.
How do you link a new wind farm to the grid? You need a pylon.
No,
and we haven't even started on the local environmental rows that will spring up across this country as it becomes increasingly despoiled by these monsters that, frankly, we don't really need.
Right.
Deep sea cables, community-owned energy, people making decisions in their communities.
Right. I mean, David also made the point that this is just about politics. It's just about Kemi Badenoch's leadership. And it certainly has put some green space between you and the Labour Party.
Kool-Aid about, you know, the cost of doing nothing. Well, let me just show you... describe a graph. It's a very simple one. UK CO2 output is bumbling along at near nothing now, and China's is going stratospheric. India hasn't even started on its journey of using coal and other fossil fuels, nor has Indonesia, nor has most of Africa.
And does that mean there should be inaction here?
If we did it globally, that would be great. But our use is now even less than a rounding error, and yet it's uniquely us that are putting our industries out of work. I mean, how can it be? The Labour government, within the first few months of a government, has actually caused Britain to no longer have a virgin steel industry. The only
All right, well, let David respond, because then we
only country that has not got a virgin steel company.
And by the way, Craig, you're the director of an organisation that said there's no observational evidence for any kind of climate crisis. So I think experts take a very different view. But the real thing here is, in many ways, there isn't a trade-off. And so, to an extent, this is a false dichotomy. Let's take energy bills. The reality is, the reason energy bills went up is nothing to do...
And still are.
...with green levies, and everything to do with the fact the last government didn't guarantee our energy security and made us beholden to foreign dictators. And what the government's plans are actually going to do is help us harness the wave of green transition that will actually create jobs and create prosperity. If we follow this route, not only will we miss our climate targets, we'll repel billions of pounds of investment and actually put growth at risk. It's a lose-lose, which is exactly what I would expect.
Well, and I'm afraid...
We're hang on China for half of this stuff.
Right, well, hang on. We're going to move on because we've got to get to this statement in about 10 minutes' time. But first of all, just to remind everybody, Kemi Badenoch, whom we've been talking about, the Leader of the Opposition, will be putting questions to the Prime Minister tomorrow, and the programme will be on at 11:15. PMQs will be on at midday, and we'll bring that to you live and uninterrupted. Now, we are expecting this statement from the Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall shortly. But let's first of all have a listen to the Cabinet Office Minister and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden, earlier today.
I don't think anyone can be comfortable with the trends of recent years. When you are a government, it's your job to face up to big challenges facing the country. And I think reform of the welfare state is a big challenge facing the country. And we want to get that right today. So we'll be bringing forward a package which will get support to people who need it, but also increase the chances of people getting work in the future.
Right, well, the plans have proven to be controversial amongst a number of Labour backbenchers who, as I said earlier, argue that the government should instead consider a wealth tax on Britain's richest individuals and households. Let's have a listen.
If you brought in a wealth tax of just 2% on people with assets over £10 million, that would raise £24 billion a year. That's what I would do.
Instead of cutting benefits for disabled people, wouldn't the moral thing to do, the courageous thing to do, be to make a real tough choice and introduce a wealth tax on the very wealthiest people in our society?
Last year, the collective wealth of UK billionaires rose by £35 million a day. And if we implemented just very moderate wealth taxes, things like a 2% tax at a threshold of assets over 10 million a year, that would only impact an estimated 20,000 people.
We're joined now by Paul Johnson, the Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who joins us from central London. Paul, are those Labour MPs right that a wealth tax is a viable alternative to the government's proposals?
Well, you've always got options over tax increases as opposed to spending cuts when you're trying to balance the books. You could increase pretty much any tax if you wanted to. You need to start, of course, from the position that taxes are currently at their highest level ever in this country and going to yet higher levels. In terms of a wealth tax, I mean, it sounds terribly attractive because it does sound like only the very wealthiest are going to end up paying it. Now, the problem is we have very few, if any, examples around the world of where wealth taxes have been effective. You could give it a go on people with more than 10 million or more than 100 million or what have you. I'm not sure that really changes the discussion about what's appropriate in terms of disability benefits. I think these are entirely different issues and we should be talking about them entirely separately.
In terms of the sort of amounts that could be raised, you heard a few figures there. Are they, again, credible?
I'd be very sceptical about those kinds of levels. It's very, I mean, in the end, you probably need to be talking to a lawyer more than you need to be talking to an economist about what's actually feasible in terms of getting money from these very wealthy people. This is something that, as I say, has not been effective in other countries where it's been tried. That's not to say we should rule it out now, but this is not a sort of a set of money that's just there ready for the plucking and in a way that allows you to avoid decisions elsewhere.
Right. What about borrowing more? Is that a credible alternative for this government to look at and busting what we call, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor's fiscal rules?
Well, I can't see the Chancellor doing that. She's been absolutely clear that she's not going to break those rules. I mean, the problem with borrowing more is that we're already in a position where we're paying more, much more actually, in debt interest alone than, for example, the entire defence budget plus the entire overseas aid budget. We're going to be spending £100 billion a year on disability and health benefits by the end of the decade, and we're going to be spending more than that on debt interest. And one of the things I think is a bit frustrating about this conversation is that people often seem to suggest that borrowing somehow is free. Well, that free lunch, as it were, has really come back to bite us in recent years. We've got debt at its highest level for something like 70 years. We've got borrowing costs at their highest level in many decades. And one of the reasons, actually, that the government's struggling to balance its books is it having already to spend such a huge amount of money, more than £100 billion a year, every year, on debt interest.
Right, and what about the idea the government calls this, its plans to cut welfare, a moral mission into getting people off welfare and back into work? Do you agree with that, or is it just about savings?
Well, I'm sure it's been driven by the need for savings. The costs of these benefits are pretty extraordinary and will pretty much double what we're spending. Even after inflation, we'll be pretty much doubling on current forecasts what we're spending on health benefits for the working age population over this decade. That does suggest that something has gone significantly wrong. The numbers of people on these benefits are growing very fast. About twice as many people are coming forward and claiming benefits today as was the case just a few years ago. So you've got a combination of problems. This is clearly a fiscal problem.
Yes.
It's clearly also a problem of people's health and the number of people who are not in work at the moment. So I think you probably do need a sort of dual sense of why you're trying to achieve this. One is you need to have in mind you're actually trying to help people into work, not just punish them,
right.
But you're also trying to deal with what is clearly a real and substantive problem, and a problem, I have to say, pretty much unique to this country, which is the extraordinary increase in the numbers of people who've come forward over the last few years. This is not a post-COVID problem across the world. It's a problem in this country and pretty much this country alone.
Paul Johnson, thank you very much. Natalie Bennett, you heard what Paul Johnson has said, and the Green Manifesto does call for a wealth tax along similar lines to what we heard from some of those Labour MPs. Do you think you need to rethink that policy?
Absolutely not. And I think what we've seen is that policy has totally taken off and won huge amounts of public and indeed Labour MP support, as we've just been hearing.
Will it work on the basis of what you've heard from Paul Johnson?
Absolutely. And I think, why are we saying, oh, it's an innovation, so we can't do it? Surely we want to be innovative in finding new ways of solving our problems. And, right now at this moment, there's a big blue bus with the patriotic millionaires driving down to Westminster calling for a wealth tax. Yes. We're seeing it right across society.
Right, well, we can see the Commons filling up there. On that basis, innovative is what Natalie calls it. Paul Johnson says the evidence in other countries where it's been tried is not very strong. Is that because wealthy people leave the country?
Yeah, and I think we are seeing that in the UK as well. There is a departure of millionaires, wealthy people in the UK. But I think we shouldn't get away from the fact that it is a perfectly viable policy and you can defend it. It's, I think George Osborne looked at a policy. He's talked about that recently. Ed Balls looked at the same kind of policy. It is totally viable, but it is a separate question, I think, from this problem of the welfare budget, and they should be separated out. And the Labour Party needs to do a better job of saying why they are doing this as a moral reason, and if they can't make that case, they can't just rely on the fiscal case.
Right. Well, David, what did you say to that?
I mean, look, the central issue here is that we have 3 million people locked out of the labour market, and by the way, many of them trapped in poverty as a result of the way the welfare system works today. And this conversation, exactly to your point, in many ways is neither here nor there. And Natalie, you've offered no proposals whatsoever for how you'd fix that really pressing problem.
Yeah, but,
as you heard from Paul Johnson, we are unique in the developed world in facing it. The system is fundamentally
But why not do a wealth tax? Let's focus on what the government is doing.
We've got a very big wealth tax.
Well, hang on.
It's called inheritance tax.
Well, hang on. I can come to you in a minute. But first of all, why not introduce a wealth tax? It's viable, says Tom.
Look, A, as I've said, the core conversation is around how we change welfare. B, we've already done a lot to make sure that those with the broader shoulders pay a bit more. We put up VAT on private schools. We've changed the non-DOMS regime. We've tightened up the windfall tax. And as a result, the top 1% of taxpayers pay 30% of tax. Top 5% pay 50%, right? But I think the issue here today is about reforming.
I'm going to have to break into you because here is Liz Kendall.
This government is ambitious for our people and our country. And we believe that unleashing the talents of the British people is the key to our future success. But the social security system we inherited from the Conservatives is failing the very people it is supposed to help and holding our country back. The facts speak for themselves. 1 in 10 people of working age now claiming a sickness or disability benefit. Almost 1 million young people not in education, employment or training. That's 1 in 8 of all our young people. 2.8 million out of work due to long-term sickness. And the number of people claiming personal independence payments set to double this decade from 2 to 4.3 million, with the growth in claims rising faster among young people and mental health conditions, and with claims up to 4 times higher in parts of the Midlands, Wales and the North, where economic demand is weakest. Places that were decimated in the 80s and 90s, written off for years by successive Tory governments and never given the chances they deserve. And the consequences of this failure are there for all to see. Millions of people who could work, trapped on benefits, denied the income, hope, dignity and self-respect that we know good work brings. And taxpayers paying millions more on the costs of failure, with spending on working age sickness and disability benefits up 20 billion since the pandemic, set to rise by a further 18 billion by the end of this Parliament to £70 billion a year. And it is not like this in most other comparable countries, where spending on these benefits since the pandemic is either stable or falling, whilst ours continues to inexorably rise. This is the legacy of 14 years of Tory failure. And today, Mr. Speaker, we say no more. Since we were elected, we have hit the ground running to get more people into good work through our plan for change. We're investing an extra £26 billion into the NHS to drive down waiting lists and get people back to health and back to work. We're improving the quality of work and making work pay with our landmark employment rights legislation and increases in the national living wage. We're creating more good jobs in every part of the country, in clean energy and through our modern industrial strategy. And we are introducing the biggest reforms to employment support in a generation with our £240 million Get Britain Working plan. Today, our Pathways to Work Green Paper sets out decisive action to fix the broken benefits system, creating a more proactive, pro-work system for those who can work, and so we protect it for those who cannot work now and for the long term. Mr. Speaker, I know as a constituency MP for 14 years that there will always be people who can never work because of the severity of their disability or illness. Under this government, the social security system will always be there for people in genuine need. That is a principle we will never compromise on. But disabled people and people with health conditions who can work should have the same rights, choices and chances to work as everybody else. That principle of equality is vital too, because far from what members opposite would have you believe, many sick and disabled people want to work with the right help and support. And unlike the Conservatives, that is what we will deliver. Mr. Speaker, our first aim is to secure a decisive shift towards prevention and early intervention. Almost 4 million people are in work with a work-limiting health condition, and around 300,000 fall out of work every year. So we've got to do far more to help people stay in work and get back to work quickly, because your chances of returning are 5 times higher in the first year. Our plans to give statutory sick pay for 1 million of the lowest paid workers and more rights to flexible working will help keep more people in work. The Workwell programme is trialling new approaches, like GPs referring people to employment advisors instead of signing them off sick. And our Keep Britain Working review, led by former John Lewis boss Sir Charlie Mayfield, will set out what government and employers can do together to create healthier, more inclusive workplaces. So we help more employers offer opportunities for disabled people, including through measures like reasonable adjustments, alongside our Green Paper consultation on reforming access to work so it is fit for the future. And today, I can announce another step. Our Green Paper will consult on a major reform of contributory benefits, merging contributions-based job seekers allowance and employment support allowance into a new time-limited unemployment insurance paid at a higher rate without having to prove you cannot work in order to get it. So if you have paid into the system, you'll get stronger income protection while we help you get back on track. Our second objective is to restore trust and fairness in the benefits system by fixing the broken assessment process and tackling the perverse incentives that drive people into welfare dependency. Now, members on this side of the House have long argued that the work capability assessment is not fit for purpose. Going through the WCA is complex, time-consuming and often stressful for claimants, especially if they also have to go through the PIP assessment. And more fundamentally, it's based on a binary can-can't work divide, when we know the truth is that many people's physical and mental health conditions fluctuate. The consultation on the Conservatives' discredited WCA proposals was ruled unlawful by the courts. So today I can announce we will not go ahead with their proposals. Instead, we will scrap the WCA in 2028. In future, extra financial support for health conditions in universal credit will be available solely through the PIP assessment. So extra income is based on the impact of someone's health condition or disability, not on their capacity to work. reducing the number of assessments that people have to go through, and a vital step towards de-risking work. And, Mr. Speaker, we will do more by legislating for a right to try, guaranteeing that work in and of itself will never lead to a benefit reassessment, giving people the confidence to take the plunge and try work without the fear this will put their benefits at risk. Mr. Speaker, we will also tackle the perverse financial incentives that the party opposite created, which actively encourage people into welfare dependency. The Tories ran down the value of the Universal Credit Standard Allowance. As a result, the health top-up is now worth double the standard allowance at more than £400 a month. And in 2017, they took away extra financial help for the group of people who could prepare for work. So we're left with a binary assessment of can or can't work and a clear financial incentive to define yourself as incapable of work, something the OBR, IFS and others say is a likely factor driving people onto incapacity benefits. Today, we tackle this problem head-on. We will legislate to rebalance the payments in universal credit from April next year, holding the value of the health top-up fixed in cash terms for existing claimants and reducing it for new claimants, with an additional premium for people with severe lifelong conditions that mean that they will never work, to give them the financial security they deserve. And alongside this, Mr. Speaker, we will bring in a permanent, above-inflation rise to the standard allowance in universal credit for the first time ever. A £775 annual increase in cash terms by 2029-30, and a decisive step to tackle the perverse incentives in the system. We will also fix the failing system of reassessments. The Conservatives failed to switch reassessments back on after the pandemic. So they're down by more than 2/3, with face-to-face assessments going from 7 in 10 to only 1 in 10. We will turn these reassessments back on at scale and shift the focus back to doing more face-to-face. And we will ensure they are recorded as standard to give confidence to claimants and taxpayers that they're being done properly. And, Mr. Speaker, I can also announce for people on universal credit with the most severe disabilities and health conditions that will never improve, we want to ensure that they are never reassessed to give them the confidence and dignity they deserve. And we will fundamentally overhaul the DWP's safeguarding approach to make sure all our processes and training are of the highest quality, so we protect and support the most vulnerable people. Mr. Speaker, alongside these changes, we will also reform disability benefits, so they focus support on those in greatest need and to ensure the social security system lasts for the long term into the future. Social and demographic change means more people are now living with a disability. But the increase in disability benefits is double the rate of increasing prevalence of working age disability in the country, with claims amongst young people up 150%, for mental health conditions up 190%, and claims for learning difficulties up over 400%, according to the IFS. Every day, there are more than 1,000 new PIP awards. That's the equivalent of adding a population the size of Leicester every single year. Mr. Speaker, that is not sustainable long-term, above all for the people who depend on this support. But the Tories have no proper plan to deal with this, just yet more ill-thought-through consultations. So today I can announce this government will not bring in the Tory proposals for vouchers, because disabled people should have choice and control over their lives. We will not means test PIP, because disabled people deserve extra support, whatever their incomes. And, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm we will not freeze PIP either. Instead, our reforms will focus support on those with the greatest needs. We will legislate for a change in PIP, so people will need to score a minimum of 4 points in at least one activity to qualify for the daily living element of PIP from November 2026. This will not affect the mobility component of PIP and only relates to the daily living element. And alongside this, we will launch a review of the PIP assessment, led by my right honourable friend, the Minister for Social Security and Disability, in close consultation with disabled people, the organisations that represent them, and other experts. So we make sure PIP and the assessment process is fit for purpose now and into the future. And, Mr. Speaker, this is a significant reform package that is expected to save over £5 billion in 2029-30, and the OBR will set out their final assessment of the costings next week. Our third and final objective is to deliver personalised support to sick and disabled people who can work to get the jobs they need and deserve. We know from the last Labour government and our new deals for disabled people, young people and the long-term unemployed, the difference that proper employment support can make. And more recent evidence from the Work Choice programme and additional work coach time shows support can make a significant difference in the number of people getting work, keeping work and improving their mental health and well-being too. This Labour government believes that an active state can transform people's lives. We know this because we have done it before. So today I can announce we will invest an additional £1 billion a year for employment support with the aim of guaranteeing high-quality, tailored and personalised support to help people on a pathway to work. The largest ever investment in opportunities to work for sick and disabled people. And alongside this, for those on the UC Health top-up, we will bring in an expectation to engage and a new support conversation to talk about people's goals and aspirations, combined with an offer of personalised health skills and employment support. And because being out of work or training when you're young is so damaging for your future prospects, we will go further. In addition to funding our youth guarantee through the £240 million Get Britain working plan, we will consult on delaying access to the health top-up in universal credit until someone is aged 22, with the savings reinvested into work support and training opportunities, so every young person is earning or learning and on a pathway to success. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives left a broken benefits system that's failing the people who depend on it and our country as a whole. The status quo is unacceptable, but it is not inevitable. We were elected on a mandate for change, to end the sticking plaster approach and tackle the root causes of problems in this country that have been ignored for too long. Because we believe in the value and potential of every single person, that we all have something positive to contribute and can make a difference, whether that's in paid work, in our families or communities, alongside our neighbours and friends. We will unleash this potential in every corner of the land, because we are as ambitious for the British people as they are for themselves. Today we take decisive action, and I commend this statement to the House.
Liz Kendall ending her statement and announcing and unveiling major reforms and cuts to the existing system. She very much set the statement, blaming the previous Conservative governments, a legacy of Tory failure. She said they had broken the system and there were millions of people who could work trapped on benefits. Some of the headlines from that statement, which will be included in what we call a green paper that will be published, I should think, imminently. There is going to be a merging of job seekers allowance and employment support allowance into what she called a contributory employment insurance system. The upper rate of universal credit for those judged too ill to work will be cut, as I understand it, for new claimants and frozen in cash terms for existing claimants. That, of course, will make up some of the savings, the £5 billion that they are hoping to save. The work capability assessment is not fit for purpose, she said, and therefore it is being scrapped, but not until 2028. And all health payments will go through what we were talking about before, personal independent payments, and not linked to work. And I think that, as I say, will happen in 2028. Let me get your response, first of all, David, to the statement. But let me put this to you. You wouldn't be making these savings and cuts to welfare unless Rachel Reeves was under pressure to balance the books ahead of her March statement. That's why you're doing it.
No, look, I fundamentally disagree. There is a strong moral case for this, and this, as you heard from Paul, forms a cornerstone of why we're doing this. We are a laggard in terms of all developed countries. We have 3 million people locked out of the labour market. 1 in 8 young people being denied their future. I mean, some of the stats are striking. Once you're on incapacity benefit, only 1 in 110 people flow off a month. It takes the average person, if that trend goes forward, 9 years to find a job. The system is utterly broken.
So
and what you've
just
heard
a moral,
today,
it's a moral mission for you, nothing to do with making those cuts.
Obviously, economics plays a role, not least because if you want to safeguard a system to protect those who need it, which is absolutely at the heart of what Liz Kendall is laying out, it has to be sustainable. And the fact that PIP, for instance, has doubled in cost is a factor. But the core of this is around the moral case. And what we've seen from her is protecting those who need it most, giving people support that they've never had before, and also helping job seekers as a whole get the support they need to get back into work.
I know it's a very big statement, a lot to digest. We don't have that much time. Do you support it? Would you vote for it if it comes to votes in the House?
I will support changes to welfare that Liz Kendall is suggesting, with that toughness and the robustness and the moral case, of course, because it's long overdue.
And because previous Conservative governments failed to do it.
We didn't do it well enough, no. But is this really because they've run out of money? I think there's a lot of that involved. My worry is, listening to that, we're replacing a thicket of complexity with a thicket of complexity. And not until 28, 29 when, there's an election and we can put carrots in front of people before election time. So I'm afraid until we see the Green Paper, there's a lot of thicket of obfuscation.
Do you embrace David's argument about this being a moral mission, to get millions of people who could work back into work?
Absolutely not, because what's the top line of this? It's a £5 billion cut from some of the poorest people in our society, people who already are switching off the heating in winter because they can't afford the bill at the current level, people who are skipping meals, and we have a problem with ill health. Being poor, being in poverty, that doesn't make you better. What we need to do is actually have the deal.
They're going to need the £5 billion to pay the new unemployed on the back of the Employment Rights Bill, so don't worry about that.
Do you think, listening to that, and I know there was a lot of detail and a lot of numbers, can they find those £5 billion worth of savings?
I think most of the people that I've spoken to think that's very unlikely. I mean, I was amazed that you managed to follow all of what was just said, because it was incredibly complicated. And I think that
well,
is
let's
part
hope
of the
I got it
problem.
all right as we were sitting in.
Yeah, but I do want to come back on something Natalie said, because I think it's wrong and it's important that it's corrected. What we actually heard from Liz Kendall is that support will be focused on those who need it most. They will absolutely be protected. But the core principle here is that you can't help people if they can work and they're not in work, because ultimately this is why almost 40% of the inactive are rated as poor, because the benefit system, however funded, cannot be the same as getting a good job. So what we need to do, so many people with health issues want to work, and the current system stops them doing that, and that's why things like the right to try are so important. This is going to change.
I forgot about the right to try. Do you welcome that? I mean, this is the idea that you won't have to be reassessed.
Universal credit was a great idea. I think one of the finest things we did, but there are still lumps and bumps in it, and people are reluctant to get into work because they still struggle to get back onto benefit. That was not the idea behind UC, and that has not worked as well as it should. So if this improves it, it will have my support.
Thank you very much to all my guests for joining us today on this big day in Westminster, as we just heard from Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, unveiling these reforms, changes and cuts to welfare. I'll be back tomorrow. Bye-bye.